What is the outdoor EMV liability shift?
Outdoor EMV liability speaks to the need for accepting EMV transactions at the fuel pump. So if you think back into 2015 where we had a similar liability shift in the store, now in October 2020, all C-store operators need to accept EMV transactions at the fuel pump. If they don't make the transition, then they're going to be the liability shift. They are going to be liable now for all the fraudulent transactions that take place at the fuel pump.
So what does that mean for my business?
Well, it means that you need to start thinking about how do I go about upgrading the equipment that I have in the fuel pump to accept EMV transactions. For some of your pumps, if it's relatively modern, it may be a simple matter of updating the electronics. That can run maybe $5,000, $10,000. Some of your pumps, however, for many of the pumps in the industry, because they're so old, it will really require a complete replace. That could be $15,000, $20,000 or more for a whole new pump that's EMV capable. And then you're also facing the installation charges, which could be equally expensive to install, to cut up the concrete and actually put in new pumps.
So this sounds like a pretty big cost for my business. What if I don't want to make the change?
Well, there's not a criminal law here, right? This is a liability shift, a mandate by Visa. So there is no law that says you have to do this. However, the shift, if you will, is you are now going to be responsible for anyone who does not accept EMV transactions from a consumer who had an EMV capable card is now going to be held liable for that fraud. And so the big challenge here and the big concern here is that if you don't make the transition, then you're going to be caught with a meaningful impact of fraud into your business. And you want to think about that too as well, right? Because there's 150,000 some C-stores that are out there, right? And everyone who does do the EMV transactions, that part of the market becomes unavailable to the fraudsters to a large. It's just very complicated to try to replicate and try to hack a chip-enabled credit card. It's so much easier to focus on those who haven't. So if you don't do the EMV upgrade, then you are going to be part of that portion of the market that is going to be the most appealing for fraud now. And those who have done the EMV will be suddenly kind of removed from their focus, and you will be, you and others like you will then be the sole focus of the fraudsters at that point.
But I don't have any fraud in my business right now, so why do I need to invest in this large expense?
Well, see, the problem is that you actually do have fraud. It's just not being passed on to you. So when you think about the credit card business, last year over $10 billion in credit card fees. So when you think about the card issues, the banks, and all the different mouths to feed in the credit card ecosystem, it was okay to actually protect you from that. There was really no need to actually zing you for the actual fraud that was taking place in your business. However, now with this liability shift, that all changes now. This is motivated because fraud is a problem. Credit card fraud is a big deal, and the number one way of addressing this today is through the chip. And so by mandating adoption of the chip, they're protecting themselves. And so to motivate you to adopt the chip, you're going to start to feel the penalties there. So even though you don't have it today, it doesn't really speak to what happens tomorrow.
So it sounds like this is something that I'm going to need to do to protect my business. What recommendations do you have and steps that I should be taking to get prepared for October of 2020?
You want to act now, because if you think about it, there are over 150,000 C-stores that are out there. That's an enormous population of businesses that need to upgrade their pumps. And some have estimated that it could take 7 years to upgrade all of those pumps with EMV hardware and software, just because of the sheer magnitude. So you want to act sooner rather than later. For some, as I talk to a lot of C-store operators, some are saying, "Well, I'll just wait and see how bad it gets. Let the October 2020, let me see how much fraud I have to pay, and then if it gets too much, then at that point I'll make the investment into upgrading my pumps to accept an EMV chip." But the problem with that mentality is it doesn't really factor in the limited resources this industry has in terms of technicians, just technicians and hardware, to go out to 150,000 some locations to do this work. And so there's going to be an enormous load, a burden of a very limited supply of technicians to actually do this work. So come October 2020, let's say November, December, you start to get your first bill. 1,000, 5,000, maybe at 10,000 in January, you say, "Hey, that's too much. I want to do the EMV upgrade." Well, just because you want to doesn't mean that they can actually do it that month. Because you, along with whatever portion of the market hasn't done the outdoor EMV upgrade, are all going to be jumping in line for that same limited resource saying, hey, come over to my sites and basically upgrade. You'll be in line for the hardware, you'll be in line for the installation services too as well. It could take weeks, it could take months for them to eventually get to your store to actually do the EMV upgrade and alleviate the fraud liability that you have. So the big warning here is you want to start thinking through very carefully now how to get the upgrade done in time of the mandate, the deadline.
So to stay ahead of this curve and make sure that my business is protected and that I don't end up in this backlog of services and technicians needing to come out, what can Hughes do to help me with this?
Yeah, what's really interesting about this EMV update is that we are talking about now a new generation of fuel pumps and a new generation of technology to support it, which also brings out a new generation of infrastructure requirements too as well. EMV transactions, for example, for many of the major oils, as they start thinking about EMV-capable transactions, a lot of them want to disable entirely the offline capabilities. They don't want to accept transactions. And instead, they are mandating that each C-store operator have dual paths into their C-store. So a primary path and then a backup. Primary DSL cable connection, and then maybe an LTE or a satellite backup or something along those lines. The idea being that if you lose your primary connection, you don't want to lose your ability to take credit card transactions. And so from an EMV perspective, there's a higher availability requirement. And so many are basically pursuing high availability configurations for their C-stores. Also for an EMV transaction, it requires more bandwidth than the typical transactions today. So it's going to be more of a bandwidth load and creating more congestion on the network too as well. Above and beyond that, there's also the software related to updates to the pumps themselves. These new pumps are going to be updated over the network too as well, creating more burdens every time a new software or patch release. So from a Hughes perspective, we look at this EMV update and we're starting to realize that it's the first big problem is getting the new hardware and the new software out. The next big problem then is the operational requirements. How do you provide the connectivity, the availability, and how do you manage the network piece too as well? You know, when the retail and when the restaurant industry went through their digital transformations and is still going through theirs, a very common problem was I'm putting so much stuff in the cloud, I'm doing so much that my credit card transactions are all over the map. Sometimes they work well, sometimes they don't. And that inconsistency of the credit card transaction is a problem that we have studied for many decades now. And we've learned that even over the worst types of circuits, been able to get consistent performance of the point of sale transactions. And so that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't is our specialty. We know how to fix that particular problem. So from a Hughes perspective, as a managed service provider, we want to not only provide a robust and solid application performance and credit card transaction experience, we also want to simplify the technology with a whole portfolio of installation, field maintenance, customer care, and operational resources too as well.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. It sounds like I need to do some more research and figure out exactly how to protect my business when this shift does happen.
Absolutely.